Okay, good morning and welcome to this webinar sponsored by BeMyEye. We've got a great lineup of speakers and a panel from the industry here today to help us understand why in-store execution has changed forever and what you need to do to succeed. We're going to showcase how industry leaders are thinking beyond simply reacting to COVID-19 and how they're seriously working on re-engineering their sales teams and accelerating a more data-driven approach to in-store execution. My name's Neil Preddy. I'm an advisor to BeMyEye, and I've been involved in retail and FMCG research for 30 years. And I'm going to be chairing the session today. And I'm just going to, a quick note to our technical person, I'm not advancing the slides here. Corentin, I don't know if you can help me.
Sorry, what's your issue? Okay.
No, it's okay. It's working now. So yeah, our speakers and panel members, they're a vastly experienced set of leaders from the industry across Europe. And our agenda features some research, a viewpoint from a top consultant in the industry, and some practical input from practitioners in the industry as well. And at the end, we're going to have a short Q&A session. So please use the little Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen to post questions, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can before the end. When you do, please add your name and your organization to the question so we can understand the context properly. So our first speaker today is Luca Pagano. Luca is the CEO of BeMyEye, and he's going to share with us the results of a pan-European survey that BeMyEye recently fielded. So Luca, a big thank you to you and to BeMyEye for sponsoring this event. First, can you tell us why you're sponsoring it and how is BeMyEye relevant to the topic?
Thank you, Neil, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm really looking forward to hearing some inspiring insights from our distinguished guests today. Well, the answer to your first question, why this webinar is implicit in our mission. We're passionate about transforming field intelligence, and are proud to do so by allowing anyone with a smartphone to earn money. And listening to our clients throughout this period of intense disruption, we kept hearing the same questions. Will the pace of disruption hit our business even harder than we currently imagine? Is our organization changing fast or significantly enough? And what are the best practices across industries and countries that we can be inspired by? So we've decided to gather feedbacks from our key clients and partners and share them with the wider industry to form a view of how in-store execution must evolve in light of the new world we find ourselves in. Why is BeMyEye promoting it? Well, firstly, because we have a deep experience all over Europe and Russia helping brands across FMCG, consumer electronics, and pharma perfect their in-store execution. And secondly, because the people in our 2 million strong crowd, whom we call eyes, not only visit shops to collect data on behalf of our clients, they're also obviously shoppers themselves. And so we've asked 10,000 of them across 16 countries how their shopping habits might change post-lockdown. The picture that emerges, and there's no surprises here, is of great concern over personal health and financial well-being, resulting in significant reduction in spend and a change in the product mix. Crucially, shoppers are also conducting fewer store visits, edging back towards the weekly shopping routine, and doing fewer transactions for bigger baskets. They're also planning ahead because they don't want to spend much time in crowded indoor spaces. And as a result, the moment of truth, so those critical seconds when the shopper is in front of a shelf before he selects a brand, is becoming shorter and less frequent than ever. And in this context, obviously, getting the basics right in terms of availability and visibility for brands becomes absolutely vital. Also, 30% of our shoppers have shifted their primary shopping channel. Of course, online is the big winner, and its growth has only been limited by retailers' inability to cope with the spike in demand, something that pretty much all of us have experienced probably in the last 2 or 3 months. But the other big winner is convenience, as shoppers favor proximity and smaller, less crowded units to shop, big enough to get what is needed, but close to home and easy to get in and out of. This shift in shopping destination, compounded with the bigger baskets and the fewer shopping trips that we saw earlier, poses an interesting challenge for brands, who first of all need to adapt and simplify their assortments, as smaller former retailers streamline their category and product range to serve the weekly shopping needs more effectively. And importantly, brands must also begin to monitor more regularly those channels, which have historically represented blind spots with negative ROI at a single visit level. And all of the above points towards an increased polarization or bifurcation, as Deloitte calls it, of retail, between, on the one hand, retailers that are aggressively focused on price, and on the other, retailers offering niche premium products. This is a trend that's been going on for the last 10 years in response to growing income inequality, which will inevitably deepen through the current downturn. In this respect, hypermarkets and discounters, which have done less well throughout the crisis, will no doubt bounce back pretty strongly as the economic downturn starts to bite deeper. So physical retail is not disappearing despite the growth of online. It is just changing very, very rapidly to adapt to the new reality, and parts of retail are actually growing nicely. But the new landscape, as we've seen, presents brands with all sorts of challenges when it comes to in-store execution. And to be able to address them effectively, brands need a new toolkit. Things like AI and actionable insights, which are 2 of the top 10 tech disruptive trends of the next decade, will fundamentally transform the nature of in-store execution. Because getting the basics of in-store execution right, so as one of our panelists likes to say, you just have to get the right strategy, the great execution, and continuous monitoring and optimization. In a retail world that's undergoing dramatic change and with social distancing causing a sharp increase in the cost per visit for field reps, great in-store execution can only happen if field forces can evolve into truly data-driven organizations equipped with the right tools to become more agile, more effective, and ultimately much more productive. And this means, above all, less mundane tasks like data collection, especially data that doesn't move the needle, and more focus on sellout based on few but highly impactful, actionable insights. So in this context, BeMyEye makes it easy and painless for brands in-store execution to evolve into a progressively more data-driven and impactful process. And whether it is crowdsourcing in-store data, processing such data through our image recognition technology, providing the tools for reps to be more efficient, or a combination of the above, our mission is really to be a one-stop shop to help CPGs dramatically increase their sales effectiveness by enabling that continuous data feedback loop that is crucial for success in the face of constant market disruption. I guess you expected the sponsorship of this webinar to come with some form of self-promotion, but that is it, I promise, from our side. So I will conclude by saying that in summary, the crisis has fundamentally changed shoppers' behavior, and in doing so, it is forcing an acceleration of the digital transformation for CPGs, who don't really have a choice but to become truly data-driven when it comes to their in-store execution. In other words, as the title of this webinar says, in-store execution has changed forever. So let's hear all the insights and predictions on that from our host, Neil Preddy, and his distinguished guest. Thank you.
Thanks, Luca. It's very clear then that there's been a very profound effect of the crisis on consumer behavior and on shopping behavior. And the key question now is as restrictions start to be relaxed, what are the lasting effects going to be? What will the post-lockdown world be like? How will companies manage the tensions between safety and getting the business going again? To find out about some of those things, we spoke to CEOs and senior sales leaders from a range of companies across Europe. You see the names of some of them up there. They're covering a range of categories and a range of channels. So a really big thank you to our participants from those companies. What we found is that they are thinking beyond simply reacting to the crisis, as we said earlier. They're really looking seriously at re-engineering their sales teams and accelerating a more data-driven approach to in-store execution. So I'm going to share with you now just a brief summary of what they told us, and the full version is in the white paper that you'll be able to get after the webinar. So one of the first things that came up, and probably the top item, was safety first was everybody's priority. I mean, there were no exceptions to this, and one of the things that struck me was there was a genuine concern from everybody for the safety of their people, for the safety of retailer staff, and for the safety of shoppers. So that was very reassuring. Beyond that, though, there were three key themes that came through. The first is scenarios. And by scenarios, I think people were recognizing that nobody claimed to know exactly what the future would look like, but there are some fairly likely outcomes per market based on the severity and the duration of the crisis and how it's handled. And so by thinking about those, companies have a way of being able to plan and think about their actions. And the key thing here is not so much to be completely accurate in your forecast of what the scenario is going to be, but it's to be flexible and to monitor and to be agile in your planning. The second area was simplicity. The stress of a rapid lockdown exposed some weaknesses in the supply chain system, and we saw some of those with the supply issues that appeared in store. And companies recognized that in many instances, in relation to those problems, simplicity was a friend and complexity was an enemy. So things like having too many SKUs, very complicated promotional programs were things that tended to cause problems. So now there's a really big push to simplify and focus on doing a few things really well. And the third area that came through was what I've called systems here. And it goes back to a point that Luca made, that it's really critical now to make the most of every single minute in store. And to do that, people are turning to data and digital solutions to get the right information to the right person and to act quickly, but also to do that in a systematic way so that problems are solved permanently, and also going beyond that and asking questions about what really adds value and focusing on the things that really make a difference. So those were our key themes. The driver behind all of those, of course, is some of the shopping behavior that you saw highlighted in the presentation that Luca gave. One of the things that is obviously very much on people's minds are how long are some of those behaviors going to appear. YouGov do some interesting tracking internationally on some of the things that people are doing to keep themselves safe in the crisis. And there's some data here actually runs up to the end of last week that picks up on two things that are very relevant to shopping. And that is one, people who are avoiding going out to crowded places. And across the 5 countries we picked up there, you've got 60 to 70% of people who avoid public places still and crowded places. And the second one is people who say that they are avoiding touching objects in public places. So think about shopping and browsing in a store. So you've still got a half to maybe slightly more than half of people who, even as of last week, are still very nervous about doing that. So it's that kind of behavior that's driving the fewer visits, bigger baskets, planning before, hurrying through the store, and also the proximity, going to a store that's nearby and online. And importantly, driving that shorter moment of truth. So if you combine that with needing to deal with the legal restrictions that retailers put on and keeping your people safe, there's quite a big task to do. And what our respondents told us, and it was summarized in one particular quote, is we need to reinvent in-store in 3 to 4 months. The good news in that, though, is that as restrictions are lifted, retailers are actually welcoming merchandisers back. This is something we heard, particularly in the later interviews that we did. And they're recognizing that shelves need to be stocked and the retailers need help. And as some of our respondents found, and Brunner in particular, there were also some nice surprises in that some of the digital communications technology had benefits in actually bringing people closer together, particularly, for instance, in arranging top-to-top meetings. So sales leaders need to work on this objective while navigating through the constraints and legal restrictions and thinking of safety. So how are they going about doing that? We heard a few key areas where people were working. As I mentioned before, it begins with a drive to simplify. At a company level, this can mean looking at the number of SKUs, obviously looking at the supply chain and promotions strategies. For sales teams, it means simplifying the number of KPIs that are used and measuring what matters. That links in also to the second point, which is really looking hard at what are the activities that really add value. So when we're in the store, we're selling, we're merchandising, versus some of those that don't add value, which could be around efficient routing, but also having salespeople collecting data is becoming more and more questioned. And a lot of our respondents have, in fact, already stopped, and others are actually looking at crowdsourcing solutions for that, and also looking at sources like how can they use EPOS data to start to model signals that tell them where stores need activity. That's not to say, though, that data is not important, because data is key to driving some of the most efficient activities. So we're definitely seeing a focus on bringing different sources together. So whether that's EPOS, the in-store data, or data inventory data from retailer systems, and then using analytics and AI to identify what needs to be improved, where it needs to be improved, and getting that information to the people who can take action on it. In that context, speed and freshness are really everything. You need to be able to know today what needs to be fixed today to take action on it. But it's also about combining that with a systematic approach. So one memorable phrase that we heard was, fix it now, fix it ongoing. So it's not just about a point in time, but it's about fixing the underlying issue. And then one of the toughest problems that people are facing, particularly is thinking of the channel mix that we saw earlier on, is what does that mean for channel coverage and routes? Which stores should I continue to call on? Which should I drop? Which are the most important ones? How can we be more efficient? So there's a lot of attention being given to that. What we also saw, though, are under this heading of new models of operation, some companies are starting to consider questions that they probably maybe wouldn't have dreamt about thinking about a year ago. So asking themselves some quite big questions. For instance, could we cooperate with other probably non-competing companies to share resources in the sales area, gain efficiency, and maybe make it perhaps viable to start calling on some of the smaller stores that are doing better? Can we actually make the move of stopping our salespeople collecting data and moving to some other source like crowdsourcing or making better use of EPOS? And then even thinking about, could crowdsourcing be extended beyond data collection? Could the crowd be used to carry out simple merchandising tasks in store? So those are all questions that are getting serious consideration by at least some of the people who responded to us, and I think a sign of some big changes that are coming down the track. So to finish, it's pretty clear that we're going to be living with COVID-19 for some time, and that means we're going to be living with uncertainty for some time. Although one thing that does seem pretty clear during the pandemic is that the future is going to be a more digital future. We see that in all kinds of areas. And FMCG companies and retailers are already feeling those changes. It's obviously remote working. The big step forward in e-commerce is part of that. And some of the growing consumer concerns as well around hygiene and safety and the need for value are also going to be consequences of the pandemic. But in-store execution, stores are still going to be important, and time in store is very, very precious. And so we come back really to finish this section by emphasizing on three key themes that I think are going to be with us. One, I emphasize again, safety. As long as the virus remains a threat, I think that's going to be the top priority for most companies. Simplicity is going to be with us. People are going to focus on really identifying what's important, focusing on a few priorities and doing them really well and cutting out the activities that don't add value. And systems and data, it's going to be a much more digital future, using technology, using data to guide daily activity, not just for big decisions. So it's about identifying where opportunity exists and getting that information quickly and directly to the people who can take action. The full version of what you've heard, including some of the research that Luca presented, is going to be in the white paper that will be available immediately after this this webinar, and you will get the link for that. So with that, I want to move on to our next speaker, who's going to go into a little bit more depth about some of the actions and that sales forces can take and should be taking. He is Giovanni Arnese, and Giovanni is a partner at Bain Company, where he leads Bain's perspective on perfect sales execution. His CV includes some time at Procter & Gamble, and he's one of the industry's foremost experts on this topic. So Giovanni is going to share his perspective and the perspective that Bain has developed on the opportunities and the challenges of the pandemic. So Giovanni, I'll pass the screen over to you.
Thank you, Neil.
Take it away.
I try to share my screen. Let's see if it works. I guess you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Good. So thank you, Neil and Luca, for inviting me to the webinar. Well, what I'll try to do in the next 15 minutes is just to share some of the highlights from our recent cases and discussions on how the post-COVID is actually changing the sales agenda, and it's possibly changing the sales agenda in a way which will stay even beyond the current restrictions that we are seeing for accessing the stores and for working into the stores. So, of course, this last couple of months have been a bit tough for all of us. We understand that today most of the CP companies are actually going through what we normally call Act Now, which means focus on safety, focus on how do we bring employees back at work, how do we deal with the immediate emergency. And so we're not going to talk about what we've done in the last couple of months. What we're going to talk about is how we see this evolving going forward. Yet we don't know, of course, we don't have all the answers. We have a lot of questions on how this is going to play out for the grocery, for the on-trade business. There are multiple scenarios available, but the reality is that we don't actually know exactly how it will be going forward. There's a lot of uncertainties. What we're sure is that the landscape in front of us will be dramatically different, and this will have a significant impact on in-store execution. I think Neil has been touching upon that, but we see some of the changes which are already materializing, and that can be sort of summarized in 2-3 points. The first is what Neil already called simplification. We're already seeing a massive simplification in the way in which CP companies approach the stores. Typical CP companies or beverage player would have from 70 to 80 KPIs to tackle in store. When you look at the different sort of in-store execution activities, you look at the shelf and secondary placement, you look at the different brands. We've seen companies working with more than 70 to 80 KPIs. Today, this is becoming much less. All the companies realize that they don't have the luxury to spend in time, to spend in store the same time they were spending before. And today, data allow us to make more informed choices on what really matters in driving market share in store. So we can be much more deliberate in driving simplification and in making our sort of contact strategy more efficient. The second element is what's happening on the distribution partners. Many of our distribution partners are actually struggling. They've been stranded for months and not sure that all of them will actually resume their activities. So we see most of our clients in CP space, actually they're thinking also the route to market, going more direct, regaining control over a part of the distribution they had sort of disregarded in the past. And then there are many. The third one is that the out-of-home landscape will be different. There are different estimates there, but it's not. Say it's fair to assume that almost 20-25% of the outlets will not reopen, or some of them may reopen under a different name or VAT number. But there's a significant change in the out-of-home landscape, and so that's what we are seeing, that our clients are preparing themselves for a very different operating model when it comes to sales, which include more digital, more data-driven, fewer KPIs, but more important KPIs and different route to market structure. There is a positive element that we like also to share in this period. And the positive element is that if you look at the past downturns, you'll discover that 50% of Fortune 500 companies have been created during a downturn. And the other interesting piece of data is that over 70% of the gaps between winners and losers is actually created in times of challenge or downturn. So this period will be very tough, but it's also a period which would allow to companies who are leading the change to gain significant competitive advantage. A couple of words on the scenarios. There are multiple scenarios. We are seeing already some countries going back in lockdown in specific areas. There is a lot of uncertainty. There's uncertainty about the science. There's uncertainty about the government reactions. There's uncertainty about how the macroeconomy will actually respond to the crisis. The most important thing is not actually to focus on the scenario, because nobody has the crystal ball, but actually to understand where we are going and what is the potential impact, and how we can drive some of the changes. Many of the discussion that we do with, especially with the CP leaders, is that you can create your own scenario. You can change the rule of the industry when you have a market share which allow you to do so. And a couple of so the companies which are joining today have actually this ability. So this scenario will be can be different scenarios. We're more into scenario number 2. We don't expect something like a rapid recovery, but at the same time, we know that uncertainty is still so high that we cannot really place all our bets on a single scenario. What we're seeing on the other side is that some of the consumer trends that we've seen in the last couple of months are actually persisting still today. What we're pretty sure is that there will be new laws of gravity for the consumer. The first one is the fight for value. This has been true in all previous downturn periods. We already see some of these materializing today. So that's something on which we're pretty confident that the rise of value will be an important element of the post-COVID consumer behavior. The second is pretty obvious. There's been a change in online habits. What we have achieved in 2 months or 3 months of the lockdown for the online sort of share of purchase, it's equivalent to 5 years of growth of the online if compared to the previous period. And then the third one, and many of these will gonna stay. We already see some of these online habits are gonna stay even further. And this crisis has brought also a lot of people who were not really digitally enabled to go to online for purchase. So we expect many of these to remain. And the third one, on which we can be pretty confident, is that the focus on health and safety will affect how companies are looking at their product offers and at their portfolio and the way in which they approach the consumer. On the other side, there's still elements on which we're not fully sure. For example, we've seen last 3 or 4 years with a strong focus on sustainability. We don't yet know if that will continue or it will shift more to sort of safety and to well-being of people beyond the sort of planet sustainability. The other element is that we've seen over the last couple of years sort of an acceleration of purpose for brand. So the intrinsic value of the brand. Again, this is something on which we're not sure how this will play out. If you take beer here, I'm seeing Enrico on the screen. We've seen the last couple of years actually with the sort of rising consumption on small local brands, what we call normally insurgent. What we've seen in the last 3 months is the prevalence of strong and established brands versus small brands which had a meaning before. How this is going to play out is still a big question. Channel reset. Will we really have a very different channel landscape? We think so. We've seen the increase in convenience. We've seen the struggling of large surfaces. This has been an acceleration of a trend which was already there. We don't know to what extent the new channel mix will stay, but this is something that will certainly be different than the past. And then the level of comfort of the population with the data privacy. We've seen with more access to the online that some of the concerns that people would have on privacy have gone down. This would probably open sort of a different also approach and sentiment versus data privacy, which could enable much better use of data for CP companies and retailers. The customer landscape has been very different. We touched upon it, and in terms of grocery, of course, we've seen sort of waves of stockpiling and panic buying, but now they've gone back to normalization. We've seen the return of proximity and convenience. This will likely stay. The other thing that will stay is that there still will be constraint in accessing the store. This will limit the ability of CP companies to operate in store, which is calling for a very different sales agenda when visiting the store and for in-store execution. HoReCa, we've been talking about that, so there is a shakeout. It's pretty obvious. Many outlets will not reopen. The ones that are reopening have much less traffic. In some markets, it is more, in some markets, it is less, but HoReCa will be definitely different. Online, we spoke about it. This we're going to stay, and distributors, which in our opinion, it's a very important element of the puzzle. Distributors will probably continue to suffer because if retailers are impacted by even a small decrease in sales, this is even more true for the distributors. They operate on even thinner margin than the retailers themselves. So that's why we've run a number of panels like this one and roundtables with leading CP companies, and we have collected inputs on how sort of this crisis is changing their agenda. We have identified most of the sort of consensus going around 4 themes that will likely change the agenda for CP going forward. The first one is to redefine the coverage model. And this is linked to 2 elements. The first, it's a very different channel mix. The second one, it's the fact that we'll be able to perform probably less visits per day with our sales team. And part of the channels which are growing are channels that we know are very challenging to be served in an efficient way. So companies are starting to think how I can make a profitable route on smaller surfaces, which in the past I just delegated to the distributors. And now today those channels are on the rise, and so I cannot avoid to visit the store. So really redefining the coverage model is one of the first elements. These are at the center of the agenda. The second one is rethinking of the route to market. This is specifically linked to the fact that many distributors will be unable to survive the crisis in the next few months, and because we have a very different channel mix, which forces us to maybe change some of the choices that we've done in the past on route to market. And typically the route to market is one of the choices in sales where you act by incremental small changes. I change the distributor here, I expand a bit the coverage here. This is probably now becoming a more strategic topic for CP companies. And so a more holistic rethink of the route to market is what we've seen our clients doing. The third one, we've been talking about that. It's about massively simplifying in-store execution. We have less time available in store. We have a lower ability to engage emotionally our shoppers, probably less space to do secondary displays. We've seen a return to basic, for example, simple assortment, relevance of the hero SKUs versus the tail of the assortment. So what we expect is that in-store execution will be very different. And this will be also very different because the crisis has forced many companies to think about the digital solutions. And now we can use the data. Today, it would be probably unacceptable to have a sales rep spending 20 minutes in checking compliance to 70 KPIs, where many of them are actually really not having a significant impact on sales. So digital and simplification and data are really going hand in hand and enhancing a transformation of the sales agenda. But at one point on coverage, we like to use this slide, which maybe some of you will recognize. But the typical approach of a CP company in the past has been to focus on the growing channels, so large surfaces, and leave the rest to the distributors. Today, the mix has changed significantly. And so we see as best-in-class companies who are actually tackling multiple channels, not only the most sort of obvious one like hypermarkets and supermarkets, but all the channels where actually you can meet the consumer. Also because the consumer is doing less shopping per week, but we're meeting the consumer in much more places. And so what we see companies doing, it's actually to rethink how do we need to cover the most important channels, even though those were channels that in the past we've just left to our distributors. So the thinking of the coverage is one of the key elements of the future agenda. This one I'll go very fast. We've seen multiple projections of that, but what we see is that the acceleration of the convenience and the discounters will continue also going forward at the expenses of the large surfaces, which will be even more challenging in terms of profitability. And so what is out there? So most of the CP players are confronting themselves with less outlets, a different channel mix, struggling distributors, and the growth of the online. And so this is forcing them to rethink also the choices around the route to market in a more strategic way. That's just an example of how you can think about the steps of the route to market, to prospecting, the negotiation, the in-store execution, the order generation, but many of our clients are actually rethinking in a more holistically and strategic way the choices they make around the different sub-channels. They're being much more granular in terms of channel prioritization and much more deliberate in trying to gain better control of the channels which are growing. And the last part is about in-store execution. So it's not a surprise that in-store execution drives a big amount of the market share difference in store. This is an example coming from the beauty sector in Germany. We have many of them in food and beverage. But the reality is that when you look at the market share outlet by outlet, and today data allow you to look at that, and then you compare that with the quality of in-store execution, you always discover that the best performing stores in terms of market share are stores where you have less out of stock, better position, more visibility, more displays. So the question is, how can we create a system that actually focuses on the few things that matter, and we are able to double down and focus our resources on the few things that can accelerate our market share in store. One example, this is coming from a chocolate client. What you see on the left part is the number of the KPIs that they were serving, that they were trying to achieve before in store. So we're talking about more than 70 KPIs. What we did with them is actually use data on store compliance and use data on store sales to determine what are the few that really matter. So we're able to transform the agenda of this client from following 70 KPIs to focusing on 5 or 6 what we call power decisions that are the few things that actually drive market share in store. And this is where today you can focus the attention of your people, your investment for promotions, your trade terms, instead of spreading them out on many sales levers that have very doubtful impact on the market share. The other part is about contact models. This is just an example, but today there are multiple contact models, means way to access the store and reach to the store, which is much less expensive than a sales rep going directly into the store. And today we don't have any more excuses to look at this sort of a more efficient contact model. Also because the channels which are growing are channels which are intrinsically unprofitable when you try to serve them directly with a traditional sales force. And there are many examples of companies using multiple contact models in order to reach the stores, have a form of control, but not sending directly people. So two points to conclude this and give it back to Neil. What we're seeing our clients doing first is look at the route to market with a strategic angle instead of an incremental angle, which is just change a distributor or expand a bit the coverage. The second one is being much more surgical at the point of sales, being more deliberate in understanding what are the few KPIs that really matter and focus on that. And at the same time, use technology in order to perform activities that we know are low value added, like checking compliance. Neil, should I give it back to you?
Yes, please, Giovanni, yes.
Right. Let me check. I should stop sharing. I'll try to do that. Okay.
Perfect. I'll just share mine back again. Great, Giovanni, thank you very much for that. I mean, some very insightful points and a lot of depth, obviously, in the research behind it. So thank you very much. We're going to turn now to our panel, and I should to take some questions that we have for them and then open it up for the Q&A. So let me introduce them to you first. So our first panel member is Enrico Galasso. Enrico is the CEO of Peroni Italy, and he has a very rich career in FMCG with Coca-Cola Hellenic, Ferrero, P&G, Reckitt Benckiser, and in fact Bain as well. Enrico is going to be joined by Rodrigo Moura, and Rodrigo gives us a good focus on the pharmacy channel. He's the sales director for Reckitt Benckiser in Italy, and he has experience globally in markets, including the UK and Brazil, and has also served with Sony and P&G. And completing the panel is Julian Cordy. Julian is very familiar with the practicalities of making things happen in store. He's the CEO of UK field sales agency, Field Sales Solutions. So a big welcome to all three of you. And maybe I'll just stop sharing and we can allow everybody to see people more clearly. First question, which is really to all of you, but maybe we'll start with Enrico. Apart from safety, which is the top of everyone's agenda, what's on the top of your list for your sales teams in the next 3 months? Enrico.
Hi, I hope everybody can hear me. So thank you very much anyway for inviting me to this session. So again, sounds basic, but yes, safety is still a priority for us, and I think it will be for a few months. I think at this stage, the priorities for the sales force are going in the line with what you described and also Giovanni reported in his presentation. So first of all, as an approach, we have simplified what the expectations are and the strategic objectives for the next months. And in line with that, we of course simplified what we are tracking and what we are incentivizing people on. Also driven by the kind of still very high degree of uncertainty that we have in the market. And when you think about sales, in this case is also given incentives is not so straightforward given the channel and the customer shift that you are seeing in the market. So it's also important to ensure that the engagement of the sales force is balanced with the kind of the standard tools and all other initiatives that you put in place to ensure that they do the right thing for the short term and whilst building the future. So in that perspective, this last part is one of the things that we have agreed is to manage the short term to build the long term. In a way, there are jokes about kind of 2020 non-existing and 2019 being followed by 2021 for many perspectives. But again, this is a year of crisis. That, as you said, it would be kind of a crime to waste it, as somebody said. So the approach for us is to ensure that we are focusing our people on building for the future.
Well, Rodrigo, how does it look for you?
Hi everyone. Good morning to you, Neil. Thanks for the opportunity. Good to see also some ex-colleagues here. Hi, Enrico. So if I could summarize the 3 top priorities for us on top of safety, is the first one is to learn fast. How is the new normal looks like? I think we really need to understand what the dynamics of the change, the transformation. It is a crisis, but this crisis can also be an opportunity. The second priority is business continuity. Of course, to simplify. I really endorse what is being said here, that simplification is something that is very important and needed at this point in time. And the third priority is to capture the main market opportunities that can emerge during this period. So I think there will be a lot of things going on and arriving that we still don't know, but we need to be ready to capture the opportunities for growth. That's from me.
Perfect, thank you. And Julian, your perspective is slightly different because you serve CPGs, but you've got people going into stores. So.
Yes, thanks Neil, and hi everybody, and good morning. I think for us, there's slightly different priorities. I think what we've tried to do first is to really understand what we can achieve in stores. Because clearly some stores have got different levels of what you can and can't do in those stores. So we very quickly tried to ascertain what we can do within the constraints that the stores are providing. And I think then going on from there, we've really worked with our brand partners to understand and really get the basics back in order. I think fixtures, planograms, stock levels, core lines have gone missing because stores aren't quite so good at operating as they perhaps think they are. So there's been a lot of the getting back to basics, which we've heard a lot of earlier on in simplification. And then finally, I think maximising the data. We've talked a lot about data today. I think we perceive that we're experts in using that data, but really how we can use that data to drive quick change and get things back to as normal a position as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. That's been the three things that we've been focusing on so far.
Perfect. Thanks, Julian. We talked a lot about grocery so far, and that's sort of where we tend to focus the attention on in store, but other channels are affected too, and we mentioned them in passing, but I'd be interested to get perspective on how the challenges are different by channel. Enrico, you're obviously very much focused on away from home, so what are the differences there?
Okay, so of course, away from home, at least in our category, has been impacted, let's say, severely, as also Giovanni said and anticipated. And I think here we are seeing two kind of impacts. One is from consumers, another one is from, let's say, the customer in the channel. I think if I start from the consumers, there are some implications driven by the fact that the channel has basically two main objectives, if I can say. One is socializing, another one is a service. If you think about the lunch for workers or the travel and the on-the-go consumption. So all the latter has been kind of shattered as an habit now, and is going to be like that for the next few months. Because people are more remote working, there are much less travels. Also, all that part of the business is quite impacted. And of course, I mean, let's not even mention tourism, which is now, I think it's minus 90% so far. On the other, the socialization part, that of course has been limited and impacted by all the social distancing elements, and also by some of the numbers that you showed about people being kind of balancing out the fear and hope, like, you know, so the safety and the willingness to restart and socialize and be with friends. So this has impacted then, as I say, the channels. So on one side is what so Giovanni was referring to, so the distribution, which was already kind of a very margin thin kind of a business, is critical, and criticality is also driven not only the 2 months kind of lockdown, but overall this will create a cash issue that will impact. And now we are seeing 70% of the stores have opened with roughly minus 40% throughput. And we know that, you know, of these stores that are open, some are open only to generate some cash to pay for the fixed costs. So these guys are burning cash, and that they will probably bankrupt in the next few months. So the situation is not easy. We are working with customers to actually understand how to adapt to the new reality, and doing things that are in line with what we discussed. So at the moment, their issue is kind of generating traffic and having profitable operations. For the first one, we of course using as a support our tools, and for the rest, of course, we are working also with customers to review the assortments, to review the offer, because of course, with on the go, just to give you an idea, with on the go and take away and delivery going so much. Of course, when you talk about fountains and draft, they're not probably the right tool. So we are seeing an increase of the consumption of bottles, start of request of cans to actually use as package for delivery to consumers' houses.
A lot of changes. Rodrigo, in pharmacy, I guess different kinds of challenges, because just the absolute limitations on space are a factor there. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I hope you can hear me. The pharmacies, they stayed in the front line during the whole pandemic and the whole lockdown period. So they felt very stressed. They felt responsible for the new, in order to attend the consumers and the patients. Initially, they benefit from a certain from a pantry load. But now that categories are more normalized, they also may face challenges. So they were stressed. I know some pharmacies that have died of COVID. So imagine the level of stress for the community. At the same time, they were stressed. They changed. They need to adapt to the new safety measures. They changed their store layouts. For instance, many pharmacies has changed their store layouts in order to attend the social distance requirements. So it is a channel in transformation. It's a channel that is a different dynamic. It is a channel that the traditional approach is not appropriate anymore. So I think when you go in your route to market, in your go to market, when you discuss the steps of the call in a pharmacy is completely different. I think again reinforces the relevance of speed and simplification, and reinforce that we need to learn how to deal with the new normality in the pharmacy channel as well.
Okay, thank you. Just a reminder to everybody that you can use the Q&A facility to ask questions. Julian, any particular perspectives on different channels from you? You've got people working in different channels.
Sorry, was that for me, Neil? I couldn't really hear the question.
Yeah, sorry, Julian, yeah.
I don't think I've got much time to the guys, really. I think we do a lot of work in convenience channel. That's probably been the hardest channel to get back operating effectively, just because the size of the stores and the safety protocols that we've tried to encourage our teams to follow. But we do a lot of work in HoReCa as well. But clearly, we're not in that marketplace at the moment until that market opens. So at the moment, I think convenience, although it's a great opportunity, is probably the most difficult arena to work in, given the current government guidelines and the way the size of those stores. So I think that will come back as things start to ease on the social restrictions.
Perfect. Okay, we have the first question from the audience, and it's for you, Julian. So it comes from Mike Price at Unilever, Mike, I guess it's a kind of a challenge, really. He's sort of challenging maybe field agencies to be more innovative and cost effective. So, Julian, what's your perspective on the opportunity?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I saw the question pop up for me, so thanks for that. I think my response to that is that we do, I think, believe we've got a close partnership with BeMyEye and Luca and his team, for which we're grateful. And I think the way that we view it is that we look at our sales service at 3 levels. I'll be brief, Neil. Firstly, it's the kind of long-term strategic outsourced sales teams that can really add value, use data, and engage with stores very effectively. I think our mid-level services, the tactical, short-term sales blitz type operations, and then thirdly, the current sort of more audit data, simple data collection, which is how we work in partnership with BeMyEye. So although we don't necessarily do that delivery ourselves, it's a partnership that's incredibly effective for us, and we are in constant dialogue with BeMyEye to work out how we can add additional services to drive extra value into our brand partners.
Brilliant. Thanks, Julian. And then just a final question, because we're right up against time here then. So if the future, this is one for all of you, if the future is more digital, what skills does a sales team need to succeed? How are you looking at the skill set of your teams to manage this situation? Maybe Enrico, do you want to start with that one?
Yes. So I think, first of all, I think it will be even more important now. It was always important to ensure that you have the right level of segmentation of your sales skill set and sales force to tackle and kind of address the different segmented customers that you're dealing with. So on this perspective, I think we'll have to upgrade and review our route to market, because if I have to consider the fact that, let's say, even in the past, we were kind of having a mix of, direct calls, I mean, meetings in presence, telephones, telesales. This will have a dramatic impact on the way the route to market should be reviewed in the future, because now, I mean, most of the all in present calls probably be substituted by kind of a telesales or different kind of work. So, and that is also a different skill set because you have different kind of key account managers to manage that kind of approach. Overall, I think that there is a level of, we have defined a kind of 3 levels of digital approach. So there is a digital enablement, which is kind of the basics that you need to have, which is probably already higher than what is the average now, even to manage like all the productivity tools that you're using every day. So we're now using Teams, not even when you're thinking about sales, but I mean, there is so much that you can use and add up with the tools and add-ons on and sharing strategies and ensuring that you don't only have transactional discussions, but more engaging discussion with customers. So that's kind of a basic office. Then there is, of course, there are activities that are the ones that make you kind of part of the guys that are leading the pack, okay? And on that perspective, there is a lot of that you can do with engaging directly, integrating the supply chain and the value chain with your customers and ensure that everything works smoothly. I mean, from the order management to the customer service levels to, I mean, customer portals. So this is kind of, we think we need to be among the best. And then there is the third level, which is how you can make it at a competitive edge. And that is all what kind of, all the tools that you need to have to increase loyalty from consumers to customers to distributors, and how you can actually use it kind of and do it by managing data analytics, wherever they come from in-store data collection to other information that are now widely available. So I think this is the level of, I think, digital strategy that we are going to put in place. And of course, if I can say, I mean, COVID has been a kind of a quantum leap of 5 to 10 years in the future. And we need to follow, not to follow, I mean, to lead this transformation.
Great, thanks, Enrico. Rodrigo, anything, what would you add to that?
No, I think just coming back to the scale, I think you need to have the right scale to succeed in the market, consider the whole transformation, right? So although I'm a huge believer of the speed and also the acceleration of the digitalization, e-commerce, etc., I think we will still remain with some face-to-face sales, traditional. Of course, there will be a shift from some resource from the front line of offline sales to online sales, for sure. But you still need to cover your Pareto. You still need to gain share where your competitors are. So I think it's just an adaptation of your route to market, go to market. But in terms of scale, the market will determine the scale that your team needs to have, your sales team needs to have.
Perfect, thank you. And Julian, just a last thought from you on that one.
I think the question was, I didn't actually hear the question right at the beginning. I'm sorry. Was it all about the skills that the sales team need? Was that the question?
Yes, especially with digital.
Yeah, I think the guys have summarised it well. I think for us, we focus a huge amount of resource in terms of training our people around the use of data, how to analyse data, and how to maximise that in store. And I think we all know that's more important, but I don't think anybody should underestimate the eyes and ears in the store and the relationships that people need. So how to build really good, strong partnership relationships with key store staff, because data can tell you lots of stuff, but it doesn't actually do anything. You've actually got to make some actions, either to get stock flowing back in the system, negotiate incremental display, whatever it is, and just purely analysing data. You can't do that. You still need those relationships and skills to sell effectively to really make a difference, which is why we call field sales solutions. And we're not a field marketing company. We actually help brands sell more rather than just do stuff. That's my little pitch.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you. Well, I'm going to turn to Luca for a final word in a moment, but we're right up against time, and I know there are more questions, but we have to respect everybody's time and finish the webinar. I just want to say a big thank you to Enrico, to Julian, to Rodrigo, to Giovanni for some excellent input and giving up your time and sharing your wisdom with us today. That's been really great. Luca, over to you for a final word, but thanks to everybody for listening as well.
Thank you, Neil. Nothing more to add other than, again, thank you to Giovanni, Enrico, Julian, and Rodrigo for the great inputs and insights. Thank you, Neil, for handling the whole webinar. And I invite everyone to read the white paper, which is, as you can imagine, very insightful based on everything we discussed today, which is that obviously shopper behavior has changed dramatically, so has the retail landscape, but it seems like the general consensus is that this represents actually a great opportunity for in-store execution to finally become much more data-driven and ultimately much more effective. So with that thought, I will say that we can end this webinar, and I wish everyone a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.